it's not necessarily about like deprioritizing your current role. It's more so about finding time and then just sticking to it, and sticking to it like a professional athlete would stick to a practice.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Motivation Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bello. Today, I've got Michael Montgomery on the show. Michael, welcome.
Hey, Chris, thanks so much for having me on.
It's great to have you here. And you are coming in from, you said Toronto?
I'm in Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're in Canada. So I got the Canada part, the snow, cold. We were just talking, you've been playing two times tennis a day, or 2 times a day at the moment, right? Are you playing with the same people, different people? How's that working out?
Yeah, basically. So for context, of course, Canada can be pretty chilly. So our 2 months of the year that we get sunshine, we're just going to milk it for all it's worth for outdoor sports. So that's what I'm doing right now.
It's funny too, because I always hear, Canadians are so nice, and like, how can they be so nice if it's so cold all the time? Like, I feel like I get angry and short if I'm just freezing to my bones, but maybe you guys are just used to it now.
We have to look on the bright side of life as Canadians, so it doesn't drag us down too far. Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally.
But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself real quick, Michael? Well, clearly you love tennis now, but who is Michael outside of the 2 times a day of tennis at the moment?
Yeah. And so tennis is a new hobby of mine. Actually, funny enough, it's a strategy that I started to use in order to build my business, because what I realized was that what I was doing was I was working out, I was running, I was doing a lot of these activities that are solo related activities. So I was like, hey, I need to find something where I'm like interacting with people in my community. And so that's where tennis came from. But to back up, my story is grounded in real estate. So starting in real estate sales as a real estate agent, and then building a real estate company in our city. And then from there, realize that, hey, you know what, there's a lot of real estate agents out there that do need some support when it comes to actually building and growing a business. Very similar to other entrepreneurs out there. There's no real great like playbook out there for entrepreneurs, and real estate's very similar. Although there's a lot of great resources out there, we thought that, hey, there's probably a need for agents who are 0 to like 5 years in the industry and just want to figure out, how do I market myself? How do I ask for business? How do I sell myself? And these are all things that relate to so many entrepreneurs. So we built out this program called Rev Real Estate School, which is basically focused on helping real estate agents learn how to take care of clients and then increase their conversion and sales. And so that's been occupying the majority of my time, I would say, over the last 6 months to a year.
Very fun. And I was so curious about that as well, because I too am launching and growing and testing various offers. Hey, did that help you? Asking for feedback. Was this helpful? What would you like to learn? Are you going through that process, that iterative process of finding out what are your biggest pain points? What can I help you with? And how can I tweak this for future students who find me and come through my resources that I'm providing and creating?
Yeah. And I think you're hitting on such an important point here. And the concept of testing is something that was lost on me as an early entrepreneur, because I think so many times we think about what our customers want, and we just kind of assume that we have this image in our mind of what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. And it's always so shocking when you actually ask them. And it seems like such an easy step, which is like, reach out to your customers and ask them what they're looking for. And I just started to build, and this is actually a mistake that I made early on. I started to build with this in mind of what like a real estate agent would want. And to give people some context, what I was building was this model that basically took a real estate agent over the course of like 3 to 6 months to help them build this business. But I literally surveyed my email list and just said, what would you be looking for? And how long would you want this training to be? And they were like, oh, Mike, max 1 week. So here I was building this 3-month program. It was going to be wildly intensive, not only for them, but for me. And it would be costly for them too, given the amount of time commitment. And literally all it was one like very short email that was, if you were looking at a training program, what would you want to get out of it? How long would it be? And what would it cost? Like 3 very simple questions to an email list. And even if the email list isn't overly long, what you'll find from that is you'll get trends. And I think so many times we think we know what we want, or we think we know what our customer wants. But as soon as we start to look at these trends, it can totally reshape the way that we focus on our business. But the craziest thing is this: it's so freeing to know what your customer wants. Because as soon as you know that, and I'm not saying with 100% certainty, because I'm currently in the early stages of building this. I'm not saying that that we're not going to iterate on this as time goes on.
Mhm.
But the fact that we can garner this amount of information and then build towards it, it's freeing because now I know this is what I need to build.
Right.
But the other thing is it's kind of nerve-wracking in a sense. I think a lot of entrepreneurs probably feel this way, where it's nerve-wracking to survey your audience about what it is that what they want. Like what happens if they don't respond, or what happens if one person responds. And I would say even the act of surveying them is, in a sense, like we have to be courageous as entrepreneurs. And that's the first step in reaching out. What is it that you all would be looking for?
That's so funny that you mentioned that. Just over dinner last night, we went after the Ren Fest, like I mentioned, we went to the Renaissance
Mhm.
Festival here. We had a few friends who came with us and we got dinner with another couple. The wife was saying that she gets very cautious and she's very hesitant to make mistakes and she really hates if things don't go according to plan. And literally, like while they're on a vacation, the smallest inconvenience could come up and literally like ruin her day on this trip. And I was kind of sharing some examples of, hey, I think I've been coming at it from this entrepreneurial place. Gabby, my fiance, met me when I was putting $40,000 into an invention idea that like never really panned out, right? I quit the job and just all these things happen. Where as an entrepreneur, where I'm going with this is that we get so used to kind of failing and tweaking and testing and reiterating, falling on our face, getting back up, going forward. It becomes natural for us to be okay with asking these seemingly dumb questions to our audience, even if, so what if one person replies? So what if no one replies? We have to test. We have to continue to uncover a little bit more every day. And that allows us to get further and have these little breakthrough moments instead of assuming that we know everything from the start or that it has to go perfectly according to plan, right? So I
Mhm.
love that you mentioned that as funny as it sounds, surveying the audience could be such a simple step in at least uncovering what do they want. Because in our mind, we think this is what I would want as a real estate agent if I were starting over. But things are a little bit different now. There's different demographics of real estate agents coming into the market. What exactly they want may be different than what you wanted 5, 10 years ago. How long ago did you get started in the real estate game?
I started selling real estate 10 years ago and then started our real estate company about 5 years ago. It's just so interesting because, for example, to highlight this a little bit further, my thoughts were, well, let's build out a systems related sales training and
Okay.
with a focus on sales training, like the sense of how are we going to convert clients. And I was thinking, okay, well, what are some parts that we're going to not focus on as heavily? And one of those was social media. So I was thinking, a lot of real estate agents, they get social media. They have this down. I'm not going to focus as much on this. And in surveying the audience, of course, they all say, well, we need social media
Help.
skills. So I'm like, okay, this is what we're going to focus on. But it's quite funny in the way that ends up playing out. But it's a wildly important step. And I think as an entrepreneur, when you're starting a new venture, there's also just the element inside that if you are consistent and if you are determined that, hey, whether this is launched in 1 week or 5 years from now, like if you are determined in order to get to a certain point, you will get there if you just put in the consistent action. And one of those first steps, of course, is surveying.
Absolutely. And just the uncertainty too of am I building the right thing? There's a little bit of that, I'm sure, in your mind of am I about to set off on some adventure that's not even going to be what I end up doing 2 years from now? But it's that iterative process where it doesn't have to be cookie cutter. Like you mentioned earlier, there's no blueprint for how to do this. I mean, for real estate agents and sales, there may be more of a blueprint of you come in, here's the contract, here's the scripts, here's the listing presentation. But for things like creating your own content, creating your own courses and coaching, there isn't really a blue. I've looked around and maybe there's some frameworks,
Mhm.
but there's so many ways you can take it, right? You can go in one direction or the other. And the beauty is that it doesn't have to be the final product. It can continue to evolve over time as you determine more of the needs of your audience. Have you had more fun on the creative side of this of like, you know what? I don't want to go sit in that open house or anything anymore. I'm going to go build this instead.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Totally. Because, as I started, as probably most people do when they're starting a new venture, they have something else on the go that's keeping the lights
Right.
on and the food on the table. So this was actually a personal struggle of mine because here I am extremely motivated to build this program out and to build out this online resource. And yet I still, of course, have to be taking care of my clients and
Right.
taking care of my family by putting food on the table. So I tend to be like this one track mind guy where it's like, as soon as my mind's on something, everything else kind of goes into the background. And
Yeah.
that it's kind of like your strengths are also your weaknesses in a sense. So a strength is that I can very much focus on this and I will keep working and working and working at it. The negative to that is that then you start to lose that passion, that fire behind what else you're doing. And that was a huge learning moment for me, is how can I take my time when I'm building something on the side while also having a full-time career and business? How can I actually balance that? How can I sit on that seesaw and sit right in the
Right.
middle? And you can't. I honestly don't think you can. I think you just have to isolate certain amounts of time in your day where you're dedicating, you're blocking off to this and you're blocking it off for that. And that's so much easier said than done, as probably anybody who's listening to this who has built a business knows how easy it is to just get pulled away from whether that be your full-time job or whether your full-time job is pulling you away from what you're building. That balance is extremely challenging. And I have so much respect for those that go through this, because it's a challenging thing. But because it's challenging is what makes that reward so great on the other end, because most people can't go through it.
Right.
It's that deeply challenging when you are extremely busy. If you have kids, if you have lots of stuff on the go, it's a big process to then go and launch a new venture. But what's on the other side of that is fantastic. But we have to be determined, and we have to know that most people aren't going to get over that, which is what makes the reward that much greater.
Exactly. And it's like that thing when people say you don't really value what comes easily as much as the things that were harder for you to achieve. The views are worth the climb type quote, right? You have to go through that valley of death or despair that so many entrepreneurs kind of
Yeah.
cave and they just quit in to get to the other side. I mean, not everyone's going to get there, and that's okay. And I love that you also are sharing that there's not really a great answer to it. You just admire other people who've gone through this journey, because it is very challenging of how do I time block, and I've got this business over here, I've got family time and other, putting food on the table, like other priorities that you have to take care of. How do you have time management? You have to create the space in your calendar and be very intentional. So I'm curious for you, do you have certain days that you time block certain activities, or are you time blocking by the hours, like morning you do
Mhm.
one thing, afternoon you do something else?
Such a good question. And I would say the war of art is a really good starting place for anybody who's resonating with this and being like, oh, I've been down this road before.
The
And
resistance.
yes, you got it. Absolutely. And especially those that are creators. Now, I see everybody in basically any industry, no matter what they're doing as a creator, they're creating something. And so we tend to think that like this motivation, this spark's going to come and we're just going to like ride that wave, and that's not the case. So what I've found is if we're able to block off, and for me I need to block off extensive amount of times. I can't task switch over the course of the day. That
Mhm.
becomes very challenging for me. So knowing your energy levels and knowing that personally my energy levels are going to peak typically around 9 a.m. in the morning. So typically I'm up in the morning, and then I will give myself the first 4 hours of the day to focus on this project in particular. And then after that, I can switch into a different gear. Now, another thing that I do is when I'm looking at my tasks, both in real estate and in building Rev Real Estate School, I also prioritize them by energy level, which has been a huge unlock for me. And so, for example, if I'm building out a module, I'm going to need a lot of energy and a lot of focus. For example, like TV or background noise, that stuff will not work when you're building out a course module.
Yeah.
However, when I'm responding to emails or something like that, that's going to require less energy and less mental bandwidth. And so by focusing on when do I need that most creative time and what am I going to do with that time, which is typically for me anyways, it's kind of like 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. sort of thing. Like that is like my prime time. I'm
Mhm.
going to dedicate that time exclusively to building out creativity related work. Even though the emails are way easier, I can just bang those out and I feel great about myself because it's like a checkbox on the to-do list.
Right. Never
That's
ending, by
done.
the way. They're always coming
Never.
in.
Yeah. Because oftentimes we're going to push off the hardest task, right? We're
Yeah.
going to push off building out that module because it's challenging. It takes a lot of mental energy to do that. So I'm going to keep pushing it off until, 7 p.m. at night. And that's not when I'm going to do my best work. So
Right.
that's what's been extremely helpful for me, is prioritizing tasks based on energy levels. And I do it very simply. I go high energy, medium energy, or low energy. And if it's a low energy task, boom, afternoon, no problem. If it's high energy task, it has to be done within that morning block.
That's a really good rule of thumb. I think the real estate story, a lot of real estate agents have heard of the jar and the big rocks and the gravel, the little rocks, right? There's this cool YouTube video for those who aren't familiar with that. And pretty much if you fill the jar up with sand or those little tasks, checking emails, responding to texts and calls, and then you try to put the big rocks in the jar, they're not all going to fit. And then you put the little gravel around it, it's not going to fit in the jar because the sand took up so much space or your bandwidth. So similarly, we have to start with those big rocks, which it sounds like you were doing. Your big rocks are those creative, higher energy consuming tasks where you can't have distractions and TV on. And once you get those big rocks done, you can start to task switch and throughout the day to, let me check some emails. I can watch a show at the same time, or at least have like a podcast on, something like that. You can do a little more multitasking because it's not utilizing as much energy. And it takes some experimentation, I feel, because some people are morning people, some people claim to be night owls, and we may have different preferences depending on what we personally like to work on at certain times of the day, right? But you've been experimenting, and it sounds like 8 to 11 is your sweet spot for those higher energy consuming activities.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what works for me. And that also works for my current schedule. And I
Yeah.
think oftentimes early stage people that are basically juggling a number of different roles, they need to find time. You need to find time. And it's not necessarily about like deprioritizing your current role. It's more so about finding time and then just sticking to it, and sticking
Yeah.
to it like a professional athlete would stick to a practice. And like you would show up at practice and you would do what you need to do for X period of time. Now, X period of time can mean a number of different things too. So there are days where I'm dedicating half an hour to building out this project, and there are days where I'm dedicating the majority of the day. So I am going to pick and choose, but that being said, I have my time and I'm going to stick to it. And the thing is you will feel so much more free when you start to live in accordance with that,
Yeah.
versus just, this is my task and I'll get it done at some point in time this week. It just won't happen for me anyways. It just will not happen. I can't speak
Right.
for others. Others might be better at this than I am. But if I'm not extremely diligent, when you're running multiple different projects or organizations, if you're not diligent, you will end up getting eaten alive out there.
Absolutely. And I would really be surprised to find anyone who just magically, like you said, finds the motivation, oh, Saturday on the couch watching a movie, like, oh, I'm suddenly inspired to take action on this thing that's been sitting on my to-do list for 3 months. It usually doesn't really happen. And also another thing, when people claim that they don't have time or they're too busy, you do have the time. It's just not a priority for you. It's kind of a mental shift there where, look at where we're spending our time. Are we watching 3 hours of Netflix every single day? Well, we could probably find some time right there, shift some things around. And I assume, do you put a lot of things on your calendar? Because as a successful real estate agent, and you run a team, you have your own business and everything like that. I would imagine that you live and die by the calendar, and you time block things off, and you don't take appointments. Would I be assuming correctly that you actually put this all on a calendar? Do you use a digital calendar, paper planner, anything like that?
Yeah. So it's all in my digital calendar, and I just basically use two different calendars. I have one
Okay.
calendar that is all of my appointments, like my external appointments, and then I have a red calendar which basically showcases what I'm doing with my time. And the reason for that is there are certain windows where my team can book me where those red blocks are not there, and there's certain windows where they cannot. And building out the calendar, I find is very freeing. So when I first built it out, I was like patting myself on the back. I'm like, oh, this is gonna work great. And then a couple months in, you stop paying attention to those red blocks and you
Right.
start paying attention only to the ones where you have external meetings. And so especially for those that are founders and potentially don't have co-founders, or even if you do have co-founders, you need to be surrounding yourself with people that are working on similar style projects,
Mm.
because building out a business as a solo founder, it can be very lonely in a lot of ways, and you're up in your head a lot and you're questioning yourself, and that's good. That's really good, because you're questioning as you're moving forward, but you have to continue to move forward. And honestly, if I don't do that, I just will not, the needle will not move, right? The
Right.
big rocks will stay outside of the jar. So me knowing myself, I know that if I'm not blocking that time, but I'm diligent about the time in the sense that, let's say that I have 10 calls to make, and I've given myself 1 hour. If I've made 7 calls and that 1 hour has passed and I'm on to the next thing, I'm done. So I really ensure that I stick with my times versus sticking with the task, because the task will just expand to the time that you allow it. And
Right.
so if I do not get those 10 calls done, that's fine. I'll shift 3 over to the next day. I won't just let that continue. Otherwise, basically the calendar system starts to fall apart quite quickly.
Yes, I love that you stress the importance of switching very religiously. The example that I've heard is treat it like a school schedule where the bell rings, mid-sentence, the students close the book and walk out of that classroom because the teacher can't really hold you. You got 2 minutes to get to the next class. And we have to treat it like that, treat our day and our time as that kind of calendar where you're just switching from one thing to the next. And I also love that you mentioned that you'll push those 3 to the next day. If you miss 3 calls, you didn't get them done, you'll move them to the next day. You won't just let them disappear. But of course, that keeps you on top of things. So you're still hitting your goals and your targets without slowly slipping away and missing 3 calls every day. That would compound over time. Alternatively, also getting those done compounds over time and yields it amazing results down the road.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes that, right? If you're building out an offer or a product of sorts, like you're not going to get this done in a short period of time, and nor should you. Like if it was really easy, everyone would do it, and you would have a ton of people in that space. Instead, the fact that it's challenging, and the fact that even anybody who can get through that challenge of being able to create or build their product, they're already, in the 1 percentile of people that can get this done. So if you've already launched a product or already launched a service as an entrepreneur, I see you already in that 1%, right? Like you've already got through the biggest hurdle. And then now we get into the other challenges such as marketing and how do we speak to the product and copywriting. And then how do we generate referrals and things like that?
Definitely. And you mentioned earlier, it can be a very lonely journey. So I'm curious to hear, how do you surround yourself with the right people, big thinkers? Do you ever go to co-working spaces or just work out of coffee shops to get that energy? Or can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, really, really good question. So I have found a ton of success at co-working spaces. And there's more than one reason for that. You're surrounded by people that are like-minded, and you can be surrounded by that energy. Also, the amount of referrals and ideas and partnerships that can come from co-working spaces. Now, you have to balance that, because there are people that will go to the co-working space and not end up actually doing anything or even having conversations that can lead to potential business. Instead, they turn into, like, you have one friend at the co-working space you're always hanging out with, John at the coffee machine, and you guys are just talking sports 24/7. So you still have to think of it somewhat like a business, but that's actually where we started our real estate team, was out of a co-working space.
Cool.
And it was like the best decision that we've ever made. And our team is still based out of a co-working space for that exact same reason. Now, it's a little bit different if it's not a local business, right? Like if you're focused more on, a national business or international business, but I still think that there's so many partnerships that can come from that face-to-face interaction. There's so much trust that's built that there's opportunities out there for us that are within these co-working spaces. And I would suggest to anybody, even if you get like a drop-in pass where you're going like once a week, or even if you're attending some of the networking events or something like that, but we have to get a lot more comfortable speaking with people and speaking with confidence about our product and our offering. And we're not just going to do that by sitting in front of our computers. Like, we actually have to talk to people. And if I'm explaining like a real estate sales program to somebody who's not in real estate, and I can't really sell them on the fact of the importance of it, then I got some work to do. And so I think that there's so much value in having these conversations. And then the world has just made this process a lot easier for us, in the sense that we can be surrounded by podcasts, right? Audiobooks, things like that. And then also finding support, I think, under your own roof too, with your partners. That's really important as well.
100%, 100%. Just who you surround yourself with. And of course, technology. We're having this conversation, you in Canada, me over here in the US. Yeah. We can just shrink the world in a way and connect with people. We might have 10 calls in a day, podcasts, for example, or interviews where you're talking to someone in Singapore, or maybe they're in Australia. Time zones get a little bit challenging sometimes. Someone's got to meet super early or late, but it's still possible. Whereas before, I can't imagine, writing a letter and then waiting a week or two or whatever it would take to get a response back. Now we can get instantaneous responses. So I think there's a blessing and a curse with that. The blessing being that we have so much access to information and ideas and other people. The curse being that it's very difficult to turn it off and to time block because, there's this podcast. And if you're listening to 10 podcasts at the same time, you've got a lifetime of information that you can consume without ever taking action, right? That's like the downside that I feel a lot of people get stuck in as well.
Yeah, I use a tool called, your listeners may be familiar with it. It's called Readwise.
Okay.
If you haven't heard of it, I think it's readwise.io. And basically what it allows you to do, it's very, very cost effective. Actually, I think they have a free option, and there's no affiliation here, of course, but basically you're able to take excerpts from books, podcasts, YouTube videos, articles, and save them to this Readwise program. And then every morning, Readwise is going to serve you up all of these notes that you've made, which has actually been a game changer for me, for somebody whose memory could probably be better. And so these takeaways that I'm getting from podcasts and from books and things like that, I think we've all heard it before, that we could sit there and we could consume 24/7. And we get that feeling like we're getting somewhere.
Right.
And I think when there is a place for consuming, because that's how we're going to find ideas, motivation, things like that. But we have to differentiate between consuming and creating. And we have to be definitely creating over 50% of the time. And most of us are creating about like 5 to 10% of the time. Instead, if we tend to move that more in favor of us creating, and then as we're creating, we're learning. And creating can be creating content, but it can also be creating products and things like that. And I just think as we start to create is where we learn. And if we just consume, ultimately we'll start to hear a lot of the same topics, a lot of the same concepts, but we're just not implementing. And that's really where the rubber is going to meet the road, right? Is when we actually take what we're learning and we're implementing it. And so Readwise has been this really, really good unlock for me to like jot down everything, because otherwise where am I going to store all this stuff? And then it feeds me up every single day. It reminds me of these excerpts that are things that I need to action.
I love that idea. I hadn't heard of Readwise, so thank you for letting me know. Readwise.io, I wrote that down. A friend had something similar. He just showed me he had 5+ years. He was a consultant back in the day, and he was sharing his screen showing that he'll have nuggets from various masterminds. It was in an Excel spreadsheet. He kind of gave me an idea. When did he get the nugget? Where did he learn it? And he said it was probably $80,000 or $50,000 worth of knowledge from various masterminds he's paid for, attended. And so he can filter. If it's about sales or negotiation, he can literally filter the drop down and find all these different tips along with when did he get that? Was it in 2019, 2021? So that serves you up ideas that you may have thought were amazing back then. But as time goes on and as memory fails us and we just have so many things filling up our minds, it's very easy to forget those. So I love that this serves you up those reminders of your biggest eureka moments and takeaways so that you can really hold on to those.
Yeah, it's totally key. And I got the idea from a course that was built around this. It's called Building a Second Brain. Have you ever heard of it? It's Tiago Forte.
No, got to check that out too.
Yeah, so it's a course that he runs. I think he runs it twice a year. He's very, very big on Twitter, and it's all about organizing your digital life as like your second brain, which is kind of what we're speaking to here. And that completely transformed the way that I organized my digital life and where things go on your computer. And so how you can remember them and how you can action them. I think he has a book out now too, but I highly recommend that to anybody who opens up their like Google Drive or their Notion doc or something. And it's just all this huge jumbled mess. And you just need to condense that into like 4 actionable folders. That course is a real key for that.
That sounds so helpful. So I'm assuming your desktop isn't full of icons and folders. And
I wish I could say that, Chris. There's certain times where I look at it and I'm like, I know better. But then I'll schedule the time to like organize it. So, right. Yeah. At least there's a method to it now, where it used to just be all of these files across a number of different folders. Now it's at least condensed a little bit more.
Right. It's just funny whenever you really get organized and you can type out, I'll have codes for myself. I'll click like R for real estate, C for contracts, L for listing. So within a couple of clicks, the letter and enter, I can navigate to exactly the folder that I'm looking for. It's still probably overwhelming for someone who would be looking at my screen like, wow, you have a lot of folders. but there's a method to the madness. And as long as you have a system, I think that's the takeaway. It's not that that's the best system or my system's the best. It just matters if you can utilize the system effectively and you have a way to organize it so that whenever you want to draw upon information on that second brain, you know exactly where to find it. Because the worst feeling, I think, is when you're like, I know I saved this somewhere, no idea where it is, which Dropbox folder, or is it on my computer? And you can't find it. That's almost just as, bad as not knowing it at all, right?
Oh yeah. I know. And it's so frustrating when we just can't quite find exactly what we're looking for. So that course is great. And then even if somebody didn't want to take the course, I think he's got a book or something like that you could take, and he's got a few podcasts out that you can kind of follow the structure. Cool. But that was a really fun course.
So what's been one of your biggest takeaways in your entrepreneurship real estate journey? Just one of the biggest transformative things for you. It sounds like you've gotten very organized. You have to in this game to really stay on top of things, and you're improving yourself, and now you're adding on an additional stream of income. Do you have any main takeaway or memory that really stands out above some of the others?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. There's a couple that are coming to mind right now. The first one that I tend to tell myself quite regularly is everything is practice. And the reason I tell myself that on a regular basis is I think oftentimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to make everything very, very perfect. Mm-hmm. And nothing is ever going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. So whether it's real estate or whether it is building out this other company, understanding that the first version of this course, in a sense, is practice. When I'm going and meeting a client, it's practice. When I'm calling a lead, it's practice. When I'm creating copy for my emails, it's all practice. And then what that allows me to do is it allows me to make mistakes in what I'm doing. It's not the big game. There is no like big game out there, right? Where you're on the stage and this is like your time to shine. And if you don't shine at this moment, you're a colossal failure. And that's what goes through all of our minds, right? Is like this email, this ad sequence needs to be perfect or else I'm going to fail at everything. And we then start to go down this catastrophic road of all of potential failures that come from this. So if I just come back to remind myself that this is just practice, it basically allows me to make a mistake in what I'm doing. And that's okay, because that's part of practice. So that would be one. And then the second thing that this relates to real estate, but it relates to other companies as well. And I just tell myself that the more conversations I'm going to have, the more sales that are going to occur. Right. And if we're able to connect those two dots of conversations and sales, then basically our business will grow or will learn. In the sense, if I tie the fact to the number of conversations I'm going to have is going to lead to X number of sales, and I don't see that result, then I need to tweak my offer. If, however, I'm not having conversations with people, then you will never know if your offer is resonating or not. And so I will come back to the fact that more conversations equals more sales in any dimension or any business whatsoever. And so if I continue to tell myself those two things, oftentimes I'll just end up resetting and getting myself on the right track.
That's so powerful, because you're right. Just more conversations equals more sales. And the quote that I heard is, the more hands you shake, the more money you make. Yeah. Same thing, right? You're just talking to more people, meeting more people. And then I love that mindset of just everything is practice. It kind of takes the pressure off. It's not that Olympic medal, you're on the spotlight, or you're in the spotlight and everyone's relying on you to do your best possible performance. That's not the case. If you just approach it as practice, and I think it's important to treat every practice as if it is that Olympic event where you are in the spotlight to some extent. Mm-hmm. It kind of takes the pressure off in a way where you're like, this doesn't have to be the best phone call. I don't have to have a script memorized. I can just have a regular conversation as if we're two random friends talking, and maybe I get a listing, maybe I don't, or maybe you get business or referrals, and you never know where it's going to go, right? So the more conversations, so many people forget this part. They're like, I'm not making any sales. Have you talked to anybody? No. Have you made any pitches? No.
Yeah, it totally. And on the real estate front, I find it's always like we're tweaking our websites, or we're slightly changing our social media and things like that. And there's not anything inherently wrong with those, but understand that sales and people that you talk to are equated. Like they're like you will sell more of whatever product you're selling if you're able to talk to more people. So if you optimize for increased conversations, now these conversations have to be useful, right? Like there's certain conversations that are just not as valuable as others. But that being said, if we operate with the mindset that if we increase the number of conversations that we have today, we'll very likely have a different result tomorrow than if we don't talk to anybody. If we understand that, then a lot of our problems will go away, because most of our problems when it comes to launching businesses, and in real estate for that matter, all come down to lead generation. Like we really just need more leads. We want more leads. And a lot of that's going to come from talking to more people. Now, this can also mean, of course, that we're running ads and that sort of thing. But if we're running, even if our product is a lower cost product, I think the more of these individuals that we can talk to that are buying our product, the word of mouth, and I know real estate agents know this extremely well, the power of word of mouth,
And
but
referrals.
I think, and referrals, but a lot of marketers, I think we're still very focused on the digital side, not to take anything away from that. That's still extremely important.
Right.
But word of mouth is so powerful. It's so powerful. And I don't think that most entrepreneurs are leveraging that as much as they could.
I agree. I totally agree. And word of mouth spreads so quickly, good or bad. So that's why it's so important to treat everybody as if they have a 100,000 plus Instagram following, because you never know if they shout you out or they give you a negative review or they tell everybody in their network to never work with you because you did A, B, or C. It can go either way, either positively or negatively. But I kind of tuned into that earlier when you said you didn't even want to really touch on social media for agents. And then you surveyed your list and found out, oh, they actually do want some help. But I think the takeaway there that I kind of am extracting here is that the conversations are what matter most, not just coming up with a fancier image to post on Instagram or like a nicer intro on your YouTube video. Those little things do help you kind of get that slight edge over time, but that's not ultimately going to make the difference between someone choosing to work with you or not. Those conversations go such a long way in making sure you have those opportunities. You're getting in front of people consistently. So in light of that conversation, I'm just really curious, how do you schedule your calls or your appointments? Do you have some strategy to it? Are you really open to meet with any business owners to really get some ideas and bounce ideas off of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a couple of things here that are coming to mind. And I would say the first one, when I'm looking at structuring my tasks, which can be quite challenging as an entrepreneur, of what's going to move the needle the most, I tend to ask myself, and this actually comes from Naval, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's on, just like genius.
Naval,
but
I think Naval,
Naval.
he's a genius.
Yeah,
for sure.
so good. So what he always says is, when you're faced with two paths, choose the harder path, because the harder path in the near term is likely to produce the best results in the long term, whereas the easier path in the near term is going to produce worst results in the long term. And we could see this, right? Like if we're looking at a salad versus a burger, right? It's the exact same concept. We could eat the burger and it's going to taste delicious, but hey, we may not love that tomorrow. But the salad, on the other hand, we may not love it as much as the burger, but hey, the next day we probably will. And so I tend to use the same sort of, I guess, rubric when I'm going through and trying to figure out what it is that I'm going to be actioning. And it's going to be what is going to be the most challenging for me, because that's 9 times out of 10 what you need to do.
You're trying to procrastinate on.
Yeah, you'll try and push that back. So when it comes to these calls, or when it comes to anything, it's just, what is the most challenging? What am I most dreading? And that's typically the thing that I need to do first. And that has served me quite well.
Framework.
Yeah, and it's very easy. It's easy. That's what I like about it. It's just like, what's the most challenging thing? Even looking at my day today, what's the most challenging thing? And how can I accomplish that? And even when it comes to like the to-do list that we all have, my to-do list every single day has 3 things. It will not have more than 3 things. It may have less, but never has more than 3 things. And sometimes these things are embarrassingly small. So if you saw them at times, sometimes it's like, respond to XYZ's email, which will literally probably take me like 5 minutes, but it's been something that's important that I've just been pushing back. So basically I have 3 things, and there's never more than 3 things on that list. That's not to say I don't do more than 3 things, but those 3 things have to get done. And I do that at the start of the day, which are typically the most challenging things.
Yes. And I haven't read the book, but I have heard so many people talk about Eat the Frog by Brian Tracy, I believe, right? You do the hard thing first. That typically is kind of in line with what you said earlier. your higher energy consuming tasks that maybe require more focus and less distractions, you do those things in the morning when you have that highest amount of energy. Because if you try to do those at 8 p.m. after you're exhausted and you've played tennis twice, right? Imagine like you're probably going to be pretty tired and you're not going to do your very best work. You might be dozing off to sleep instead of coming up with that best idea. So all
Yeah.
these little ways of hacking, biohacking, I'm really into optimizing our schedules, our routines, our health, our energy. And it sounds like you are too. I think every effective entrepreneur has to kind of figure out that journey, just energy management and time management.
Yeah, energy management, you're hitting on a really good point. I think energy management is undervalued, and especially in hustle culture, right? Which hustle culture always pushes us towards like grind, 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 grind. And I've been down that road. I have definitely done that. Like when hustle culture was coming into its own, what was this, like probably 2015, 2016, 2017,
Yeah.
when it was all like really all the rage. I jumped on that bandwagon and I burnt out like crazy.
Oh, right.
Like,
Real
oh
fast.
yeah, real fast. Well, yeah, I hit a wall, which caused me to actually move out of the real estate. And I wouldn't say move out of the real estate industry, but it moved me out of real estate sales for a period of time. And a lot of that I think was based around the fact that I just burnt out. And ultimately, we've kind of been touching on this, but the yardstick will always change. And I
Yes.
think I've seen that in my life as I've scaled up my real estate business, thinking, oh, if I just sold, 100K of real estate, then all my problems would go away. Oh, 200, oh, 3, like the number continues. And I think we all inherently know that, but we don't actually live in accordance with that. So
Right.
I know as I'm building out my online course modules here, I know the true value of this is the process of building it out. It's not launching the course and getting X number of people to sign up. You're going to get a little bit of boost in happiness and dopamine when those people sign up. But when you look back on it, it's truly this journey of what you've built, right? The struggles that we've all had to overcome in building these. Even when I look back at my real estate career, it's not necessarily just the number of homes that I would sell in a year. It's about looking back on the year and like, what did I accomplish? Who's the person that I became and going through this process? And just know the yardstick will always change. So if we are just living for that one yardstick, which is kind of the general aspect of hustle culture, which is work, work, work till you get to X point. We've seen that. And I've lived that too. You hit a certain point, and on the other side of that is just another road.
Right.
It's just another road. And you're going to see all sorts of different challenges, and your challenges change. And it's like, if I go back to like me being 20 years old, right? And the amount of, I had very little, if any, responsibilities, and you have your whole life in front of you. Like your yardstick changes as time goes on. But I think we all need to understand that is if you're building, you build a Fortune 500 company, your life's not going to get easier as soon as you're a CEO of a publicly traded company. They may have less financial worries, but that being said, that's not always the case.
Exactly. And just understanding that it's hard to grasp sometimes, because I would liken it to a movie that people say, it's not very good, don't see it. And you're like, I still want to see it anyway. Kind of like, trust me, $100,000 a month isn't the promised land. And you're kind of thinking deep down, well, let me go try it for myself. Let me go buy the Ferrari. Maybe I'll be happy, right? And then you realize, well, there's a newer Ferrari, or I like the Lamborghini too, right? The yardstick will always change. That's the takeaway that I'd like to mention here for the audience to really harp on that, because understanding what do you really want? What's the impact you want to make? Why are you here? Not just to make a little more, add another zero to your bank account. There's more to life than just that. It's important. It's an aspect of it, but are you falling apart in these other areas of life, or are you being very well balanced? We can all be super successful financially and burn ourselves out, but what if your family falls apart? What if you can't play tennis 2 times a day? Like you can't do the things that you love to do. What's the point of it all, right? So the balance piece, I think, is I was really kind of prying into your mind, because I was just wondering how you do it all, juggle the family, the real estate, what you're building now with Rev Real Estate School. Do you feel like you have somewhat of a grasp on it at this point, or does it still kind of feel like you're spinning multiple plates all the time?
Yeah, I feel like you always kind of feel like you're going to be spinning a lot of plates, but I give myself a lot more grace than I think I used to, in the sense that I have an understanding now that I will need time for myself. And so, for example, in real estate, it's very, very challenging for a real estate agent to take time off because, of course, your time is dictated oftentimes by your client's schedules. And
Right.
so I just mindfully decided, hey, I'm taking 2 days off. So I would take my Wednesdays and my Sundays off. And like the world didn't fall apart. And the first Wednesday, I remember the first Wednesday I took off, my wife was making fun of me because she's like, hey, you need to take one day off because you know what happens when you don't, you burn out, which I already experienced. So she's like, I'm not going through that again. So you're taking your day off. So I took my first Wednesday off. I was sitting on the couch, Chris, and I was like, I was so anxious. I didn't know what to do. Like I didn't like my wife would kind of be over there to the side and she was working away because we would take different days off. So she was working from home. And I was sitting there and I was like extremely anxious. And I was like, what do I do? And she's like, just relax, like whatever you want. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like,
What's that?
I'm not working. I'm not working. What should I be doing? And she's like, this is exactly why you need this. This is exactly, you need to sit with this feeling of discomfort. And then onto my second Wednesday, it got a little bit better. And my third Wednesday, it got a little bit better. Fourth Wednesday, I started to play tennis as we're talking about. So I think that we also need to be extremely mindful of the fact that we're still living a life. And at the end of the day, we want to look back on this and we want to enjoy this experience. And if we are grinding to the extent that is taking away from our happiness, now that's not to cop out and be like, hey, today's tough, so I'm just going to chill. It's like mindfully taking Wednesday off is different from me just waking up on a Tuesday and being like, screw it today. Right.
Right.
Like if it's in my calendar that I'm working, I'm going to be working. But if it's in my calendar that I'm off, I'm going to be off.
Yes.
And that's so much easier said than done. But if people are able to do that, it will reshape the way that you will look at your week. And you'll have so much more motivation. You'll be so invigorated to take on the week, knowing that, hey, my Wednesday afternoons are free. I can do whatever I'd like as long as I'm accomplishing my tasks earlier on in the week.
That's so powerful. I know a lot of people listening right now are going to get a huge takeaway with that idea of just being intentional. When you're off, when you're on, and holding yourself accountable. Don't cop out, but knowing that day's coming up. Hey, Wednesday's almost there. This is a crazy Tuesday. Everything's falling apart. It seems like the world's ending, but tomorrow is Wednesday and I'm off and I get to recharge. That's something a lot of us don't have. And boundaries are non-existent, especially in real estate. People calling, texting you 6 a.m., 11 p.m. It really never ends. So you have to be mindful of that do not disturb function and setting those timers. Otherwise, you'll drive yourself crazy. And so I appreciate everything that you've been sharing here today. Where do you see yourself going in the next 5+ years in terms of your real estate, your business? I'd love to see, like, what's your vision that you have for your perfect world? Like, what would it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess, and the vision, you can always have a vision and sometimes things change, but I will tell you is this, I have a huge desire to teach. And so I really enjoy, generally speaking, teaching, whether that be in a one-on-one environment or whether that be a one-to-many environment. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that, whether there's income or not. And so as time goes on here and over the course of 5 years, we're definitely moving towards how can we train and basically improve the life and B, the income of a modern day real estate agent. And so in 5 years' time, I would love to have a highly active community that is very much dedicated to this way of selling real estate. So we have modules that are built out in such a way that's less focused, I would say, on kind of more traditional style real estate and much more focused on making more friends, building more relationships. And that is what we build our training on. And so I would love to see this continue to grow, which then of course allows me to do what I love, which is just teach.
That's powerful. And the fact that you're going to be positively influencing the lives of other people who could potentially go off into the wrong trajectory towards burnout, like you faced yourself, that's extremely powerful and, exciting to hear. And I'm really excited to just follow your journey and see where you go with that, Michael, because I can get the vibes from you of just, you're calm, collected, but you're very focused and determined when you set your mind on something. And it is very easy to let other things fall apart or to the wayside when you're all in on that one thing. So you're kind of figuring out, like, where do you need to be? How do you need to split your time and energy? And that's going to be the challenge that every real estate agent or even sales professional faces when they get into that new thing. They don't know. They get excited with all the potential. They burn out. Now they're like, well, this isn't what I thought. What should I be doing with my life? It sounds like you're going to help save a lot of people time and heartache if they can get plugged in with you before they go off that wrong path. So with that said, for anyone who's in real estate listening to my audience, or for anyone who would like to connect with you overall, where is a good spot to send them to, like the best website, or to check out your YouTube channel? Is there a great link where I can put in the show notes?
Yeah, absolutely. So YouTube, we've definitely started to prioritize that more. I'm a podcaster like you, Chris.
Yep.
So, I of course say to my listeners that I've have the face for radio. So I've done a lot by way of podcasting, and now we're starting to move towards the YouTube world. So I'm more than happy to share that. And then RevRealEstateSchool.com tends to be kind of our home base for all of our resources and programs and events and things like that.
Awesome. I will be sure to link all that up in the show notes and let you know as soon as this goes live. And thanks again, Michael. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And selfishly, I was asking a lot of questions. I'm like, how does he solve this problem? Because I still don't know. But of course, the audience gets to learn too.
Exactly. I'm definitely a work in progress, but I appreciate you taking the time. And this has been really fun.
Likewise. Thanks, Michael.
Awesome.